Greetings. I have
Greetings.
the honor and the privilege to be here today with Madam Mayor Patterson Howard of Mount Vernon, New York. Thank you so much for joining 1,000 Women Strong for this conversation, this talk back. We are honored to host you and have you with us today.
I'm really glad to be here. I'm honored. I'm humbled that I was invited to be a part of this platform, and I'm excited about the conversation that's about to ensue.
Thank you. So there's a lot going on in Mount Vernon politics and honestly the political landscape across the country. So we're gonna go macro to micro because there's a lot to talk about. But particularly in this year, 1,000 Women Strong is hyper-focused on supporting, uplifting local city and state elections, particularly coming off of last year's hundreds of races across the country, but where we primarily focus on the federal. It was important for us to show that leadership and public service and I would say political and political in terms of the candidate and the personality, but also the policy that makes people's lives better or impacts people's lives for the better or worse, depending on who gets elected.
Better or worse.
Who gets elected. How those races are and those offices and seats are just as impactful, if not more impactful, to the daily lives of people, particularly for us in our constituency, Black women across the country. And so, as I mentioned before, I'm a big fan and have been a big fan of your leadership and your work in Mount Vernon, New York. As a native of the Bronx, I say we cousins right over the line. Yeah, exactly. Different municipalities, but we recognize each other at the family cookout. So you're not upstate New York. You're not Buffalo.
We're only separated by zip code. That's
exactly.
We share a senator.
Exactly. So so with that being said, I'm really interested today to talk about why running for public office and serving in this capacity was so important to you when you ran in 2019. And then from that moment to now, how you think the landscape is changing for elected officials, particularly Black elected officials, particularly Black women elected officials in the public eye, if they're being called to serve at this moment. And then I think we make it more local and what it is, the day-to-day, the after the campaign is over, right? After everyone goes home, what it's like to actually practically be a mayor and be a public leader and a servant leader in this capacity. So you take us off. I got some guiding questions, but I just wanted to frame it for the audience.
So in 2019, it was February, and the city still had not adopted a budget. And our budget should have started in January. And so what does that mean and what does that look like? When you don't have a budget, you can't send out tax bills. If you can't send out tax bills, the biggest piece of your revenue to come in to operate city government doesn't start. And so in the middle of February with no budget, there was a budget hearing. And I had looked at the budget and along with a friend and a colleague of mine, a mentee, who also had worked in government. And we both went to testify about the budget and what we felt were revenues that were being pushed and unreasonable and expenses that were being minimized, which the budget was smoke and mirrors. And that if that budget was passed the way it was being passed, then the city would be into bankruptcy. And we had to be more honest about what was in the budget. As I was leaving that meeting, a few people said to me, "Why aren't you running for mayor? Why?" And I said, "Well, it's never been anything I'm interested in." Now, had I felt it in my spirit, had I been frustrated with what I was seeing locally, We had a mayor who had been indicted and was waiting for trial, even though he had been a mentee of mine years ago. We had seen political leadership change in our community, like dresses and a pair of pants. No mayor had been reelected for almost 20 years. We had a community that was on the verge of bankruptcy without a bond rating, an infrastructure that was crumbling, lots of challenges, but we had good people. We had good people. And over the next maybe week or so, I got lots of phone calls and calls from young people who had played at the YMCA that I was an executive director and a CEO of, young girls and women who are now women who I had led as a Girl Scout troop leader, people who I had served as a social worker who went through drug court or AIDS programs or workforce programs that I had served in. And it was really the young people in the community under the age of 30 that said, we call you mom, and you know what that stands for. I said, no, y'all just call me mom. They was like, it stands for Mother of Mount Vernon. I was like, what? They said, you've been the mother of Mount Vernon. You've been our mom for a long time, and we trust you. And we're young professionals, and we're starting to get married. We're looking at having kids, but we're looking at the future of our community. And we're looking at the fact that we want to be able to buy homes and invest, but what are we investing in? And who's leading it? And we need to have a strong leader who's going to lead with conviction, with integrity, but with a love and passion for Mount Vernon that is going to be uncompromising. And we believe that's you. And that was very humbling, right? That was very humbling to have young people who you've led, to have clients who you've served, to say, we need you to move out of this kind of human services and not-for-profit space and programmatic space into setting policy and leading administratively our community. I'd had some pastors call and say that it had been in their spirit and that I needed to pray and ask God. And I knew God had been speaking to me, but I always suffer from low self-esteem, right? I'm dyslexic. I grew up with processing speed issues. I felt that people felt that things that were very hard for me were very easy, because we learn how to, regardless of how we struggle in private, we learn how to show up in public. And so I said, well, you think you know me, but you don't know. You don't know how often I cry. You don't know how I stay up until 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning to get assignments done and to deliver the work that you see. It takes a lot. It's not easy. I don't have a magic wand and I don't snap my finger. And I think you see a reflection of me that you might be impressed by, but that's not who I really am. You see me in the light of day, and you don't see me in the struggle in the dark when I'm trying to figure out how to lead and I'm feeling overwhelmed and unworthy of the places that I'm already sitting in. They said, well, yeah, that sounds right, but that's fine, but you still need to run. then I got spiritual. God have to come down and he'd have to set a bush on fire, and the fire department would have to put it out, and it would have to spontaneously combust again. And if it does that, then I know it's God, because I'm also a minister, right? And I needed to know that it was God. I needed to know that if it was something that I'd never looked at on my own, that I wasn't pursuing this out of personal ambition or glory or anything of that nature, that this would not be an easy assignment. It would not be an easy task. And that I was going to need God to help me do it, because the things that I was aware of was one thing. The things that we know are stuffed under the bed and in the closets that we pushed in there for years and years when people are stopping by and the house isn't clean. I don't know all of those things.
Right.
And would I have the strength? Would I have the ability? I'm not a banker. I'm not a lawyer. I didn't come from a corporate space. So would I be able to lead in an environment like this, and understanding that politics are nasty? And yeah, God didn't put the burning bush on fire, but he set me on fire. And he said, no, you can't be a minister and not hear a call to serve. And so I stepped forward, very reluctantly and terrified. Can I say that again? Terrified. And offered myself for service. And God sent the help. When I went to the Democratic convention, I had kind of announced the day before the Democratic convention that I was running. There's 75 districts, 2 district leaders in each. And you had to give a 3-minute speech, and then the district leaders are polled and they say who they're going to go for. And I walked in with someone to nominate me and someone to second my nomination. And I didn't expect anything else to happen there because people had already made their commitments. And here I'm coming in literally the 11th hour, 11:59, 11:59, as close to midnight as possible, saying that this is something I wanted to do. And people said, if I knew, then I would have already committed, but I filled out my proxy and I'd already given my word and I can't go back on my word. 2 people jumped on. And so out of 150 people in the Democratic City Committee, 4 people publicly said that they would support me. And I walked out of that room with that 4 people. And I had about 6 people all together who were on a team that said, look, we'll help you get signatures, we'll help you raise money, we'll help you put your platform together. 3 of them were not political at all. They were friends. And 3 of them had run and worked on political campaigns. And we walked back to a friend's office that night, and a 20-some-year-old young man named Danny filmed my announcement mid-video. And we announced it the next morning because, as I was walking out the room, they said, well, I guess that's over. You can't raise money. You're just a social worker. You don't know anyone who has money. You're going to have to raise about $75,000 to run for mayor. Who do you know who's going to give you thousands of dollars? And I said, well, we'll figure that out. And we raised money. And after the first campaign finance report, I'd raised more money than all of the candidates. I'd collected more signatures than all of the candidates. And we got people who had never been involved politically ever and never trusted the process to become engaged and to go out and walk and knock doors and stand at train stations and stand in the supermarket parking lot and talk to people and share. Regular, average, everyday people who didn't feel that they traditionally had a voice, who came to believe in what I said I wanted to do. Not that I could snap my fingers and do, but what I had a desire to do, and how I would serve with honesty and humility and not bring shame upon my community. They got on and we won the primary. And it was like, congratulations and condolences, because now, congratulations that you won, condolences that you won, because now you have to work. And in between the primary and the general election, I had a double knee replacement. Mm-hmm. Right. So I had to continue to campaign for the general election with the double knee replacement. And I think even when I got sworn in, I was still healing from a double knee replacement and learning how to walk and, moving slowly, but figuring out how we were going to make this work, even with my limitations physically and my fears and my feelings of insecurity and insufficiency.
Wow. Thank you. Thank you. And thank you to everyone that told her she should run. Thank you.
And I said all of that to say, oftentimes people become impressed when they see people. And when we become impressed by someone and we don't understand their struggle, then we start to minimize who we are. As I was growing up as a young professional, as I was growing up as a young woman in ministry, there were a lot of people that I looked at who I was impressed by, and I measured myself by them. And I aspired to be like them, but at the same time, I saw them as larger than life. And I didn't think that I could ever be that prayer warrior, that minister, that I couldn't be that CEO or that executive, that I couldn't endure and balance being an executive and a wife and a mother and a community advocate and a daughter. And then I spoke to those women, and those same women who I was so inspired by and I was in awe of told me the truth. They said, girl, I cry. I struggle with my self-esteem. I don't see myself the way other people see. You're being impressed while I'm crying in the background somewhere, right? And so you can be me, and you already are me. You just have to believe it. And so we have to be like Nike, just do it. You can't wait as women, and I see it all the time when I've interviewed people over the years, as women, we can have 9 out of 10 of the qualifications that the job asks for, but we won't go for it because we don't have the 10th qualification. Yep. Men will look at something and see maybe 2 of the qualifications and they'll go for it, right? Because they're just alpha and they're going to go for it and they're going to move for it. Women, we have to be perfect and we have to be the perfect candidate before we'll even try something. And so I say all of that to say, you may not see in you what other people see in you. And you don't always come to a position or an opportunity with every skill set that it might require. But it doesn't mean that if you don't have the skill, that your will and your desire to learn and grow in that position will not cause you to be a great leader. Right. Mm-hmm. And so my executive coach told me years ago, there are 4 levels of incompetence. Unconscious incompetence, you don't know what you don't know. Mm-hmm. Conscious incompetence, oh my God, I don't know this. Right. And now I'm afraid. And it's what you do at that space that you're either going to go and hide, or you're going to fake it to make it, or you're going to say, I am willing to learn what I need to learn step by step. And just like a child, when they're learning how to walk, they look at everyone running around and then they get up and they fall a few times and they cry and they keep looking and they get up and they hold on to the bench or they hold on to the coffee table. They hold on to your hand and they teeter and they totter and they gain confidence eventually to let go of your hand, and they fall a few times and then they get up and they start to walk very unsteady. And then eventually they get up and they run, and they're running and they're not thinking about it. Right. And that's what happens. You're going to go through that with each skill and each challenge and each situation. There are going to be times and periods of awkwardness and fumbling and stumbling. But the question is, what do you do when you get to a place where you feel like you're stumbling and you're fumbling? You're going to either act like you know and make a fool of yourself, or you're going to surround yourself with people who are willing to teach you and help bring you up to where you need to be. And that's something that I have to do constantly as mayor, constantly. The things that I thought I would lead with when I came in here were absolutely not the things that I was confronted with when I first came. And I've had to learn more in the last 5 years. It almost feels like than I've had to learn in my entire life. And there have been many times that were scary, but we continue to press, we continue to learn, and we continue to look for experts to help us, and look for grace for the many questions that we have and the mistakes that we make.
Yeah. So I want to talk about that day after you win, or a day after you're sworn in. I don't even, because the transition is its own piece, but I want to talk about the day after you're sworn in. And one of the conversations that we're having of course, in community right now across the country is around mobilizing and supporting candidates, people hearing the call, right, to run, and getting them geared up to run for office ahead of next year, for everything from hyper-local city council, city commissioner seats to federal races, right? We're looking for new talent, if you will, or right, new energy, as they say, to revitalize the party. But one of the things I've been concerned about over the last few years is, once we champion folks into office, how are we, as community members, as nonprofit leaders that work on policy and civic and political engagement, how are we championing the people that continue to champion us? And it's really easy to jump on or critique quote unquote scandal, right? Scandal even feels, because sometimes it's just governance. Sometimes it just is the messiness of governance. But anywho, but I do want to talk about that because, right, I feel like there's a lot of energy, there's a lot of excitement around getting the perfect candidate, getting the right person into office, getting the person into office that you think will embody your vision. And then as constituents, it goes hands off, because now you're the expert, because you're the politician, and who am I? I'm just a I'm just a community member. I'm just a mom. I'm just right. I'm just a baker. I'm just right. They reduced in their role in the entire process of democracy. All of a sudden, their job is done because they voted for you. They got you in. It's over. And I think that's a horrible cycle. And I think we
And
are
lonely.
lonely,
And
and we're
lonely.
losing pivotal leadership, and we're losing wars because we don't know how to pick our battles. So
Yeah.
please expand.
So,
Yeah, so
so
the day after you're sworn in, like, just
so
tell me
my
what that looks like. The campaign office is, like, what's the difference? You move in the city hall, what's the difference?
So you go from campaigning, where everyone's fighting for the opportunity and it's the rah-rah. And even during the campaign, you have to constantly work to get the troops and your street shoulders to show up. Come out to the debates, come out to the town hall meetings, continue to knock doors with me, continue to have conversations. And it's the same energy that I need you to continue to have after I become elected. It may not be as intense and every day, for a 6-month stretch. But you can't just go back to being the soccer mom. You're the soccer mom who's still having conversations with the other soccer moms about what needs to happen in the community. You're still the PTA president or advocate who still needs to have the communications and use whatever your platform is as a community member to continue to push ahead some of the challenges and push ahead some of the things that we're trying to do in government. You're still a partner. And so, I mean, my swearing in, there was like almost 2,000 people. It was huge. It was huge. Flags, balloons, praise dancers, speeches by about 15 electeds, lots of celebration. And I got my key and I came into an empty office. No pictures on the wall, a chair, a desk, a very small round coffee table with 2 chairs there. And that was it. And now it was like, okay, I have to hire secretaries. I have to pick who my staff is. And I'd started to do some of that between the election and the swearing in.
Right.
But now you move from kind of the war room to the governance room. Now it's not about talking about what you're going to do. It's about how are you going to execute and get people to stay with the vision that you've cast and work with you through it. Not that you can do it by yourself. The city of Mount Vernon is almost 100,000 residents. I'm the mayor. We have 5 council people, 2 county legislators, a comptroller, a senator, an assemblyman in the state, and a senator and a congressman in the nation. But on a local level, excuse me, on a local level, on a municipal level, it's 7 of us. It's 7 of us every day who are working together as electeds with a staff of about 800, trying to figure out how we lead and serve the community of 100,000. And even if every staff person is working at top capacity, you're still not even 1% of the populace.
Right.
And so it takes more than just those of us who are elected, appointed, and hired to move and advance the trajectory of the city. It takes our not-for-profits. It takes our faith-based leaders. It takes our civic organizations. It takes our young people. It takes our retired people. It takes our youth leaders and our senior advocates, all of us, our business leaders working together to make a difference. And yes, sometimes people get caught up in the victory, but then they step back on what happens next. And so it becomes a very lonely place.
Yeah.
And someone told me you're never as popular as you are on the day you're elected. You go from being, and it's a radical shift. I went from being Shawyn to Madam Mayor. And but what did Madam Mayor mean? It didn't mean I had a throne. It didn't mean I had a magic wand. It just meant now that all of the things that I said I was going to try and do, now people are holding me accountable and doing. But my question is, are you going to be partners? Are you going to watch this as if it's a movie? And so we had to constantly find ways to empower the staff who remained from the last administration and blend them with the staff that we had hired and brought in and get them to see you have a role. For the staff who work on the front lines, you have a role. How do we continue to engage the neighborhood associations and all of the stakeholders in the community to be involved? How do we work with the community to set vision, to set goals, and to execute on them? And for me, it was very different because less than 90 days in, COVID hit. And then we had more questions and answers, and the world was turned upside down. But I can tell you the one thing, and the greatest lesson I think I learned during COVID is the politics really stopped. The politics stopped and community came together in a way that was surreal. While people were afraid, while we had more questions than answers, we were looking at our neighbors and our family members and our coworkers die. And that stopped a lot of the pettiness. And we tried to find solutions. And we stood up systems of food delivery and medical care and working around getting PPEs and sanitary and gloves and masks out to people. And a lot of people put the political knives down. I think the hard thing after kind of staying in that space for a while was when life went back to normal. And COVID still existed, but now the political knives and guns were back out. and people weren't as willing to work together as much. And so it was the best and the worst of times. It's the worst of times because you lost people and it was a lot of fear and terror and pain. It was best because I was so proud of my community and our people for coming together in a way that I'd never seen before. But then just as we grieved the people who died, we had to grieve kind of the consensus building and the partnering that came out of COVID when people said, well, things went back to normal.
Right.
So we used a lot of the lessons during COVID that we learned. I had Sundays with Shawyn. I had the midweek conversations with the COVID updates and just keeping people engaged. And so when we were able to go back outside, even if we weren't able to have conversations in churches and in living rooms because things were still closed, I had conversations in the middle of blocks with folding chairs and continued to have conversations. And then when we could go back inside to places, we continued to have monthly community conversations. Not town halls where I was presenting information, but so that I could hear the people. What are your questions, your concerns, your complaints, your criticisms? What are the opportunities to be involved? How can you be involved? How do you want to be involved? And continue to work and pull people in. Because while I was there to hear your complaints and your criticisms, I was also there to hear some solutions and how you wanted to be involved. And so that's been a hallmark of our administration, is finding ways to get people to be involved and keep them involved, because we cannot do it by ourselves. I don't care if you have a city council of 20, I don't care if there's 50 of you who are locally elected officials, the percentage of you that are locally elected and the staff is still usually 1% or less than what the population of a community is. So we still need everyone's help. And that's the lesson that we've continued to share. And you'll get people who will step up, and you'll get other people saying, well, I'm not paid to do that. I got 99 problems, and being a community activist ain't one. And then you have the advocates who, there are advocates, there are agitators, and there are people who honestly want to become involved. And so you have to learn and have an air, land, and sea approach to working with the advocates, the agitators, and those who want to be involved. And we find a balance to that every day. And we have not perfected it, but we continue to make the adjustments and pivot.
Excellent. Okay. So if you had a chance today to speak to yourself in that February of 2019, right? So I'm very humbled by your understanding that we are an accumulation of the journey, right? Like we are not just the recipient of the award, but it is the journey that makes it all. I don't want to say magical, but humane, right? interconnected. There was so many pieces in your story about when you got called, like when I got called to start this org. So I was like, I know that feeling. When everybody says yes, you should. Yes, I think this is a good idea, and it's that is overwhelming.
Overwhelming.
Yeah. So yes. So, but with that being said, I'm interested now because you get elected in a first Trump administration. What felt like a resistance towards the administration at every level, right? We were operating at every caliber, from local to state to federal. Going into 2020, what we were fighting back, it seemed cohesive. It seemed like a very clear target. And so now, as we are experiencing and living through a second Trump administration, and you continue to hold office, is it different? Has the climate changed for you, as an elected official? And then I guess my second question is, and then what would you give your former self, or any just good advice to anybody who's really on the edge, right? Like, and I think I want to, but I don't know, and all the things, and I don't want to get doxxed by MAGA. We're watching elected officials be, assassinated at their homes. Like, there's a heightened level of violence to be called to this work right now. And I don't think I take it for granted about what it would mean for someone to put their information out for public disclosure in this moment. So in that transition, going right, I agree with you about COVID, but going through COVID and kind of where we are now, but really from a political landscape, really from I'm thinking about running, but these I'm afraid, and I think that the fears you highlighted are real and continuous throughout, but there is a heightened level of fear right now. So I'm curious about what it feels like to live through that. Versus when you first came into office, which again was still under a Trump administration, but it feels different. But I don't know. I've never been mayor. You tell me.
So absolutely, my first year was under the Trump administration, and COVID was happening, so there was a very different type of mentality from the White House around public health and vaccinations and things of that nature. But you still have to do what you do for your community, right? And so while vaccinations weren't initially available because it was something new, while protective gear was not being disseminated fairly and sometimes being blocked, you have to do what you do, right? So it's kind of like a mother, and whether the father's there or not, whether the father's there to provide support, or he's not there because he's unable to be there or chose not to be there, you still have to do what you have to do, right? And so that's what I did. When we didn't have PPE, I went down to Chinatown with my then police commissioner and went and met the Vietnamese and the Chinese people who were doing nails, and the nail salons were closed, and we bought PPE from them. They were the surgical masks. Initially, we went other places and found ways to get PPE because the governor Cuomo said, get it by hook or crook. And so we bought PPE and brought it in for our community. And some people said, well, aren't you afraid? I said, I'm afraid of my staff dying as we're out here collecting garbage and serving as police and fire while other people are able to stay home. We still had 500 staff, 600 staff out in the community every day who didn't have the ability to stay home, and we had to get them things that they needed. When Biden came into office in 2021, it did feel like the gates opened. Yeah, we had access to the White House. We had conversations with secretaries of different departments. We were building relationships with federal agencies. But that didn't mean that, the Skittles began to fall and the rainbows burst in the sky. You still had to develop relationships. You still had to lead in your community. I still had to find ways to pick up garbage with old garbage trucks. I still had to find ways to provide public safety when we were having a hard time recruiting police, because as Black people in Mount Vernon is the Blackest community north of the Mason-Dixon line, first of all. And so with everything that happened with George Floyd and with policing and social justice protests, changes in state government and how there were mandates to recruit police, it was very hard. We lost a lot of our Black officers and we found a hard time recruiting officers. So yes, it was different. We had more access, but we still had a job to do. Because Joe Biden was in the White House did not mean all of a sudden I had all the resources that I needed to lead in our community. So we still had to work, right? The job itself, the fundamentals and the day-to-day of the job didn't change. It's just that someone who had maybe closer political ideology that you had was in government. The ARPA money and the ARPA rescue money did help. Being able to have an ear in the White House as to some of the priorities in our communities around environmental justice. Absolutely, those were good things. But again, just like me coming into office did not mean everything in my community was going to go perfect for my people. I could not have that same expectation of Biden and his administration, or if Kamala Harris were to get in. There's still challenges at their level, and we're still expected to do the job at our level and stay engaged. So when Trump was in office, we went to the National Conference of Mayors, African American Mayors, National League of Cities. We went to Capitol Hill days and lobbied. When Biden came into office, we still went to those meetings. We still talked strategy, but we did have greater access. And there was monies that were created, the infrastructure bill and the Jobs Act, and but you still had to compete for that money. So it's not like the money just came automatically, and you still had to deliver the services for whatever support was given. The ideology was there, but the work still had to be done. So, you know, whether a Democrat or a Republican is in the White House, you might politically align, but we still had a lot of work to do on the local level. I like Democrats being in the White House. I don't want to minimize that because our ideologies are the same and there's great access. But our day-to-day work, not severely changed. We still have, we as mayors say, you know, mayor, when you're mayor, the people are close to you. You're most proximate to the people. So as mayors, we always say there's no Democrat or Republican way to pave streets, to make sure the block is bright and the lights are on, to pick up garbage, to deliver police services. And those are the things that people want. You have to bring grocery stores into your community. So the day-to-day work and local level work is not as impacted by some of the political ideologies around right to life or this or this or that, because those aren't the local issues. The local issues are housing, our food, our healthcare, our public safety, our quality of life issues. And those can be supported definitely when there is political alignment on a state and a federal level. But even when you have Democrats in Albany or the State House and in the White House, they make decisions that sometimes are still very challenging for us on a local level to execute if the proper resources are not allocated. So whether they're Republicans or Democrats, lots of unfunded mandates come from federal and state government that the local leaders have to find a way to implement without funding or with reduced funding oftentimes. So it's a challenge.
But do you feel, or are you feeling a shift in a heightened political, I would say anger around, or criticism in the last few years with, I would say, the resurgence of MAGA Republicans or a very abrasive and distrustful regard towards elected officials on both sides of the aisle, but primarily progressive and leaders of color.
So what I find is that every time the White House or the State House changes hands, it's a pendulum. I think in this country, on the federal level, on the state level, and on the local level, we've lost the middle, right? It's MAGA and it's progressives. What happened to the moderates, right? Because then you can have conversations. There might be a few degrees of separation. You know, when it's MAGA, super MAGA, or it's super progressive, it's so hard to get anyone to come to the middle. And a pendulum doesn't have a middle unless it stops, right? But so pendulums swing, and they tend to swing far left, and then they swing far right, and then they swing far left, and they swing far right. And that's what impacts us most, is kind of the violent swing of the pendulum. The violent swing of the pendulum. 1 minute, you know, you have, I am a criminal justice reformist, right? I have worked in prison reentry, I've Black Lives Matter, all of those things. But when you put bail reform laws into place that went to protect Black people and not have the over-policing of Black communities, sometimes that had a reverse, it had unintended consequences. And unintended consequences is now the people who sometimes were being overly policed or overly prosecuted were now being under prosecuted and not provided certain services. And so now you weren't afraid of the police. Now you were afraid of the homeless, or you were afraid of the mentally ill, or you were afraid of the drug addict or you were afraid of a person who had guns and were wielding guns, but they don't get any time and there's no bail, and it becomes a whole cyclical changing, and in prisons and the court system become a revolving door, right? So I don't want to see anybody get Rockefeller time, and I don't want to see our neighborhoods be over-policed, but at the same time, that doesn't mean that there doesn't need to be policing. That doesn't mean that there doesn't have to be rules. You should not just be able to kind of terrorize. The police shouldn't be able to terrorize the community, and the community shouldn't be able to terrorize the community, right? So again, it's the pendulum. It's not the ideology. We have to find ways to come to more kind of middle ground ideologies, because either way, when you go far to the left, far to the right, it's violent swings, and it disrupts, and it makes it very, very difficult to govern. And so now the very people who were saying, you know, we don't want the police in the community, are now the people who are saying to me, oh, you're just letting the homeless people and the drug addicts and the mentally ill terrorize us. We don't feel safe going to the supermarket. They're hanging outside, they're begging, they're doing these things. And I'm like, but there are not laws. Being mentally ill, being homeless, being a drug addict is a crime, you know, so what do you want me to do? Right? Well, that you have to make them, I can't make, right? There are no laws in place. And so, you know, so-and-so who used to be the wino that you could put in jail overnight to sleep it off, now he gets a ticket when he's arrested, and he's right back outside. And it takes 6 months for them to get a court date, right? And the fine is not a big fine. And so, again, that's why I say that. And so now the very people, some of the very people who called for reforms are now saying, you got to lock them up. You got to change the laws. And that is the danger of going too far to the left and too far to the right.
Yeah.
That when you lose the middle, you know, and so that's why when people say progressives, okay, but progressive and how progressive, and what does that look like? And, you know, what are the consequences of being too progressive, and what are the consequences of being too conservative? And I think we have to find the middle, and we have lost the middle, and losing the middle is dangerous. There are some areas that I'm very progressive in, and there's some areas that I'm more conservative in, but I'm always willing to have a conversation. And what I think is stopped is we are no longer able to have a conversation, that we've become so polarized locally, on the state level, on the federal level, and an international level, that we spend more time gaslighting each other and doing scorched earth politics, instead of trying to find ways to come and build consensus and come up with solutions, right? And so who was it? Congressman out of South Carolina. Why am I forgetting his name right now?
Clyburn?
Yes. So Jim Clyburn, one of his favorite quotes is, you could either make headlines or headway. Which do you choose to do? I'm a person, I'm not interested in the headlines. I want to find out how we can sit down in private and how we can build consensus to get to a space that is going to work for you, work for me, and that we can move the needle bit by bit. Anytime we try and move from 0 to 100, it's going to be a violent shift and it's not going to be sustainable. And then it's going to be met with a reversal that goes in the opposite direction. And I think that's what we've been feeling in this country. And while people have become so distrustful of government because we're looking for big grand shifts, we gain something over here that makes people angry and feel like they've lost everything. And now they mobilize to steal it back and snatch it back. And then they snatch it back. And then the people who felt like they had gained something now lost it. And we just can't come together and work. Right. Yeah. So there is something to be said about moderation. There is something to be said about consensus building. And there is something to be said about being able to work in a room to make headway instead of just making headlines. Everybody's looking for a viral moment. Right. But a viral moment doesn't always produce the solutions that are sustainable that our communities need and deserve.
Right.
So I got bars and I could spit lyrics, rhymes, and verses. But at the end of the day, can we find solutions? Yeah. And I think that's what people are looking for. They're looking for solutions that make sense and that are equitable. Right. That are equitable. I'm not looking as our senator, our co-senator says, Senator Jamal Bailey, he says we got to know how to code switch, but not soul switch, right? And that's not just for your spiritual soul, it's not just for your cultural soul, it's also for the soul of our community. We have to learn how to move in different spaces, and we have to learn by how to compromise, but not so much to the point that we become compromised. And that's how I always view that. We have to learn how to compromise without compromising our values, but learn how to work with people. You're not going to win everything, but how can we move the needle forward? And how can we get off this violent pendulum that we found ourselves to be in politically that is not serving our communities? So you get $100 over here, and then next week someone snatches it and runs, and now you don't have it. So the victory you felt you had, now you feel devastated because it's all been taken away.
And people don't understand the minutia, right? Like, I mean, as you explained so eloquently about bail reform and how it can feel like in the way it's applied, if not applied with care and concern and understanding of retooling whole community ethos, not just if we fix this one problem, everything becomes perfect. People don't like, you talk about it fast because now you're an expert in it, but that takes so much time to get a bail reform bill passed in the city. Then these are hundreds of hours of conversation, negotiation with the sheriff's department or the police department in the city, and with the city council, and with community leaders, and with social workers, and with your office, and then figuring out the budget. Like, this is hundreds of hours of work.
Thousands.
Thousands. You just people feel like it's transactional. You just go and you go, the bill is changed, another bill, and it's like, I know. That's why I'm like, I want to reemphasize, like, as we talk about policy change and tweaking and what's right and what's best for the whole community versus your top issue in the moment.
But hold on. So if the victory comes without building consensus, then people are going to constantly work to undermine and bring the unintended consequences to fruition quicker. Right. And so bail reform and discovery laws were enacted on January 1st, 2020, the same day that I was sworn in. And I went to, New York Conference of Mayors meeting early in the year. And I sat there and I listened to sheriffs and I listened to mayors and people who worked in the court system go, okay, well, then that means you've taken the decision making away from the judge. No, the decision making wasn't taken away from the judges. It might have been narrowed, but there were still tools. But you had some sheriffs and you had some judges that said, oh, well, if that's what you want, then we'll just let it be a revolving door, right? So there were people who wanted it to fail from the beginning. And so they just sat back and said, well, this is what you want, we'll just let them out, right? But whose communities did it impact the most? It impacted our communities. And so, like I said, some of the same people who said that they were for it now are the very people who are sitting here saying to me every day, you need to, you need to, you need to, you need to, right? And did we build the ecosystem? Oftentimes, my grandfather was a hunter, and he taught me that you have to aim and then shoot, right? And sometimes we shoot for the policy, but we haven't done the work of aiming to build the ecosystem that is going to support the policy change, right? And so now we have our governor who was talking about, what do you call that? Kind of mandatory hospitalization again, right? But mandatory hospitalization didn't work, but did we build the full community ecosystem to support people who have varying levels of mental health problems in the community? Okay, and now, okay, we can go back to hospitalization without consent, but are we making sure that the hospital system, the mental health hospital system, has the services that it needs to give that person support? And then that if when we release them to bring them back in the community, are the support services there, right? So policy doesn't always come with an ecosystem and funding that is built to support it. And that's where you see things fall apart. And that's why we continue to also see the pendulum swing. Mm-hmm. Because we create policies, but they're not supported by a full ecosystem of services and funding that make it successful. And so when it fails, then the people who didn't want it in the first place now say, well, that didn't work, so we're going to throw the baby out with the bathwater. And that's what we do. We don't look to see the pieces that work, and we don't look to tweak. We have to find ways to tweak, small steps to change, instead of just coming and doing overhauls, because you do an overhaul, but if you don't do an overhaul of services and everything that's needed to support it, then it fails. I am still a criminal justice reform person. I still believe that, bail is supposed to be to keep a community safe. But I also know that we don't have the proper level of homeless services, mental health services, substance abuse services, and workforce development programs that we need to support those who are socially fragile and vulnerable, right? And so we can believe in something, but if we don't set them up for success, and if we don't find kind of a continuum of services, then a lot of our progressive moves will become regressive, unfortunately, if the system is what someone said, the system functions as designed. So if we don't design the systems correctly, then they will not function the way that we need them to bring about the sustainable changes that we're looking for. Yeah. Sustainability is the key word. We can make things look good for a minute, but do we fall back into things because we haven't designed the system properly?
Do you envision a future in your political career, but I would just say in general, we're going big macro to close it out, where the system is designed to serve and be in service of the most vulnerable in this country? Like, do you think we are aiming towards an America where everyone is free?
No, I don't. I don't. I see it getting worse before it gets better. I don't know what it's going to take to get better, but that doesn't mean that I'm hopeless. It means that I can do what I can do in the space that I have ability to do it, and that's what I do. And I think if we all do something, then much more gets done, right? I am not the savior. I'm not going to present myself as a savior. I'm not going to set myself up that way. But here in Mount Vernon, we adopted Mayors for Guaranteed Income. We gave 200 families $500 a month that they could use however they needed to use it to advance themselves, right? Some people said, oh, that's welfare. You just gave money away. Anybody, if you asked anybody tomorrow, do you want a $6,000 raise? They'd say yes. Right? They'd say yes. So $500 a month, what can that do? It's not going to make a person rich, but $500 a month can help you with childcare. It can help you get a little hoopty so you can go a little further out and get a job that might be living wage as opposed to being just restricted to getting something on the bus or the train line. It gives you the ability to maybe put your kid in some dance classes or culture classes or allow them to play a sport that's going to give them exposure to other things. It gives you the ability to buy healthier food or not have to pay Con Ed 1 month or your utility bill 1 month and be short on your rent. And then the next month, be short on the utility bills so that you can catch up on your rent, right? $500 makes a difference, whether you make $20,000 a year or whether you make $100,000 a year. Everybody can find something to do with $500. And what we found with a guaranteed income program is just that there were parents who were able to expose their children to different cultural or educational opportunities or get them tutoring that helped them have better education outcomes. And we know that education is the great equalizer. For some people, it allowed them to not take an extra overtime shift or two so that they could go and be at parents' conference night for their kids or spend a little more time with their kids. For some people, it helped them go back and take a class or a trade that allowed them to get a better job opportunity. And for some people, it just caused them to have a little bit of emotional relief. It gave them an opportunity to breathe because they had a little more financial security than they may not have had. And for some people, it gave them a little extra dignity that you could sit there and lend money to a family member who might be struggling, that you could show up and instead of always kind of being the person who received, you might be able to sow into someone else, right? That made a difference. Our financial empowerment center, where you can come in, whether you're on welfare or whether you're trying to put a business plan together to become an entrepreneur or take your business to the next level, or whether you're looking to buy a house or you're looking to avoid foreclosure. We have trained and qualified counselors who are meeting with our residents and working with them on creating a budget, working with them on paying down debt, working with them on creating a savings plan, helping them figure out how they're going to move into their retirement and what that looks like. What does it look like to save to send your kids to college? How do you work on the reevaluation of your home so when you sell it for the right amount? How do you bargain as you're looking to buy a home, right? So our Financial Empowerment Center is providing people free help because regardless of your income, you're able to go in there and get free services. We still have food giveaways and not just canned foods and not just rice, because that's going to give you lots of sodium and lots of starch and lots of sugar. And so for some people, our food giveaways are just helping them eat better and have more vegetables so that they can have healthier outcomes, and that we're reducing diabetes and high blood pressure in our community. We're doing job fairs, we're doing job training. Even in the cannabis space, we're helping people prepare for a cannabis industry. We're working with people to learn about green job opportunities and blue infrastructure job opportunities as infrastructure money has come down from the federal and the state government. How are we preparing for, work in the AI space or in the technology space? How are we reskilling and upskilling ourselves so that we have better employment options and the ability to have living wage jobs? We're building not affordable housing, because no one's building 30%, income housing anymore, but we are building workforce housing, and we're building market rate housing. And the people who only want market rate housing are critical of workforce housing, and the people who only want workforce housing are critical of market rate housing. But you have to do both without displacing people. We're building workforce housing in places where we've had to get rid of some of the housing that was falling apart. But it's still affordable. Affordable is relative now. And we're building market rate housing in the places like our train station and areas like that, because we also have to recruit people with higher incomes into our community so that they could shop in stores, so that we can bring better stores in and better supermarkets in, and that the people who own houses are not carrying all of the brunt of the finances of the city. Because what happens when you have to continue to raise taxes, then they're losing their houses. Yeah. Right. And a community can change that way. So there is this constant balance between how do you revitalize and invest in the people who have been living in the community traditionally and who, like the Knicks, have hung in with us even when we weren't winning. And how do you recruit people with higher incomes into the community without displacing those who have stayed here throughout the hard times? And how do you find opportunities and spaces and places for all of us to be able to live, work, play, pray, and shop together, right? What does that look like? Local elections matter because it determines on how your school system is going to be invested in, how your garbage is going to be picked up, how your neighborhoods are going to be revitalized, what type of housing is going to be built in your communities, how investments in community resources will be spent equitably. Is it only spent on the north side of town, on the south side of town? How job development and training programs and opportunities, how financial investment will happen in your community, and will services be delivered equitably? So local elections are very, very important, because yes, who sits in the White House is critical, but then also who is implementing policy and who is leading investment in the local community is very critical. The other question you had is, what message do I have for young organizers, Black women, wondering if there's a room for them in the political space? And if I could meet with other Black women, mayors or organizers, what would I like them to learn, and what would I share?
But I want to get that down to the one, one thing you wish you would have known in February of 2019 that now you're it's duh. But
here we go. So the one thing I wish I would have known in February of 2019 is that with all of my insecurities and all of my insufficiencies and all of the things that I thought about myself were not enough, I wished I would have known then that I'm enough. I've had to learn very painfully that I'm enough. I've had to learn that oftentimes you're going to have more questions than answers. And that doesn't mean that you're not enough. It just means that where you're weak in, you have to go and find other people that are strong. Do not expect yourself, and do not believe the lie that you have to have everything that you need to move forward. It's just as important not to know everything. It's more important to know what you don't know. I know what I know, but more importantly, I know what I don't know. And because I'm honest with myself about what I don't know, I'm always looking for partnerships. I'm always looking for mentoring. I look for executive coaching. And then in other places, I've also learned how to give myself grace. I realized that because I allowed people to put a superwoman cape on me, that superwoman cape became very heavy, and it almost became the noose that strangled me and lynched me. And I had to learn how to say, people, I'm not perfect. I am a person, but I am working and I'm doing hard. And that has to be enough. You have to know that you're enough because you are. You will make mistakes. Give yourself grace. We are not Black woman magic. We are Black women exhausted. We are Black women frustrated. We are Black women saturated. We are Black women tired, but we are Black women who are hardworking and who are sacrificial. And that is what you lead with. Lead with honesty, lead with compassion, and also give yourself grace. I also wish I knew in 2019 what I had to learn over time, and that was not to allow other people to define you. You know, when I first started running, they told me they wanted to present me in a certain way. I was like, I don't recognize that person. And I was told by a political consultant that if you were on a football team, what would you think your role would be? And I said, well, clearly I'd be the quarterback, or I'd be the manager or the GM or the owner. And they told me, no, that's wrong. You're the football. And you just have to let us carry you down the field and get you across the finish line. But I said, but you fumbled me over and over and over again, right? So it can't just be you defining me. You also have to listen to me again, and we come to a place of consensus on how we're going to present me. I didn't know everything, but I knew enough for you to believe enough in me to invest in me. And so you have to also hear me. And when you don't know, you have to learn how to be humble and be taught, right? So you are enough. Bottom line, you're enough. You're enough. And what you don't possess, you can learn along the way, because no one ever walks into a job knowing everything on the first day that they're going to need to succeed. And if you expect that of yourself, then you're going to kill yourself before anyone else kills you. And another thing that I had to learn, and that I'm 10 toes down on, you can't hurt me with my truth. You can hurt me with a lie, but you can't hurt me with my truth. And if I set the narrative, and if I'm honest about where I struggle, about what I do know and what I don't know and what I'm learning, then you can't hurt me with that. People can lie on me every day, and they lie on me every day. And I also realized that if I told the truth on them, I could destroy them, but then I would become them. And regardless of how people treat you, you still have to stay true to who you are. If you start fighting the way they fight, you could lose yourself and you could lose your light. And if you lose your light and you lose yourself in the midst of some of this political violence, then you won't recognize yourself. And the people who voted for you won't recognize you either. So in the midst of the struggle, the heartache, the heartbreak, being in headlines, your name being maligned, your family being challenged because of how people drag you in public, you still have to figure out how you're going to fight that battle. And in the midst of fighting that battle, you still have to do the work, because if you become distracted and you become more focused on the social media and the energy that people are bringing, then you won't be able to bring your expertise and your energy to do the work. And eventually you will fail, because you focus so much on responding, clapping back, setting people straight, and you got distracted from the work that you were sent there to do in the first place. So the apology is never going to be as loud as the disrespect, and the correction is never going to be as big as the headline. But eventually you have to realize that if you continue to lead with truth, honesty, and integrity, that they could throw everything that they throw at you. The people who know you, know you. The people who hate you, stop auditioning for them and just continue to do the work. That's it.
Thank you so much for your time today, Madam Mayor. This was an electrifying conversation. I feel full, so I'm grateful that we were able to have you to share your wisdom, your insight, your passion, your story with our audience, and the broader network that we serve, because I think it, particularly in this moment, it is important to highlight what the intricacies of leadership look like, what the nuances of it look like. And when people call for a champion, that doesn't mean we're calling for a perfect person, because none of us are God, right? But we are a reflection of his image. And so in that you came to this work with your full self, and that was enough. So thank you again so much for this conversation.